was merely sticks of polished wood with notches cut in the sticks to denote the denomination, and then the stick was split down the middle to prevent counterfeiting. These were called tally sticks. Just as in the Roman Empire, once there was plentiful government-issued money outside of the hands of the goldsmiths, who, of course, hoarded all the profit from money, when they were issuing only their gold coins, suddenly that profit went to the government. And so the greatest empire in the history of the world, the British Empire, the empire upon which the sun never set, was built on the back of this tally stick money. Tally sticks served as money for over 700 years until once the Bank of England, the first privately owned central bank in England, became established, they eventually were able to outlaw the tally stick system.
Okay, Bill.
And that is what the essence of this is. That's what Abraham Lincoln did with issuing greenback money. That is money issued by the Congress of the United States. Yes, it's fiat money. Yes, they can abuse it. But they are electable.
Bill?
The Federal Reserve is not electable, and they abuse it anyway.
Bill, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I just wanted to go back because you're covering so much, and this is great. Exactly what I want people to hear and understand. And I meant to get into our current, financial system and the fiat system now. But going back to explain to people. The goldsmiths, to explain fractional reserve banking, let's say they had 1,000 ounces of gold. They soon learned that people didn't want to carry their gold around with them. They wanted to store it there in their vault, that they could loan out 5, 10, 20, 30 times in little gold certificates to people and then get interest on those, and that people rarely all came at once wanting their physical gold. So I wanted to go back and explain that and just state that I agree with you. If we go back on a gold standard, the rich families have dominated and hoarded the gold to probably one of the greatest vertical integrations we've ever seen, and that will be a new monopoly that they control. But if we have a transparent monetary reform and have a fiat system, like with Lincoln, that the bankers killed him over, that then it makes that artificial input that is currency not be as important anymore, and it does make goods and services and true trade what society's centered around, and then we see our prosperity explode. So I totally agree with you. It's a historical fact. I just wanted to go back and ask you and Pat to maybe flesh that out a bit more.
Yeah, well, the interest, instead of going into the hands of these families, because it's a gold-backed currency, goes into the hands of the general public for the welfare of everyone equally.
But let's explain. Let's explain.
I'm the narrator of the film. Pat isn't. Pat was the producer of the film.
I understand. Bill, I understand that. We need to also be clear that our current fiat system, the profit from the interest, basically goes back to the private banks. So they get the power from the interest as well. This is their fiat system. People then start debating because the Federal Reserve and the private families have a fiat. They then start thinking, well, gold must be good because it's the opposite of a fiat. I think we need to explain that either way, we don't want a gold standard or a silver standard under them, and we don't want a fiat system under them. We want them out of it. Then we can have a national debate about what we do want.
Yes, that's correct. You understand the problem quite deeply. We were under a gold system during the Great Depression of the late 20s and 30s, so gold is not the answer.
Yeah, if you go back a step before you mentioned about the goldsmiths, at that time there was essentially a gold standard. There were other forms of money, but gold and silver predominated. People, as you mentioned, did not want to carry that around. Often if they were engaged in a large transaction, they couldn't physically carry it around. And so what they did is they deposited it with the goldsmiths, who already had vaults to protect their gold candlesticks and jewelry and so forth. And they received a receipt from the goldsmith. And so pretty soon everyone started depositing their gold and silver with the goldsmiths, and they traded these receipts. Originally, the owner of the receipt had to go back to the goldsmith and say, write this out to Bill. But ultimately, they became bearer notes, so they could simply be traded between the individuals, and the gold never left the goldsmith's vault. Well, people came into the goldsmiths and wanted to borrow money, and the goldsmiths had gold of their own, and they also had this other gold that people had deposited there, and they would loan them these receipts. but no one did an audit or checked to see how much gold was in their vaults, of course. So the goldsmiths soon learned that because not everyone walked in the same day to cash in the receipts for gold or silver, in fact, very few did, that they could start loaning more of these out than they actually had gold in deposit. In fact, they could loan it out on the other people's gold who were unaware it was happening. And ultimately, they found out they could loan it out beyond the quantity of gold and silver they had entirely. The amount they did this originally back in, say, the 1600s, 15 and 1600s, would be typically about 3 to 1 up to perhaps 5 to 1. So if they had, for instance, $10,000 in gold in the vault, they might loan out $50,000 in these gold receipts and charge interest on the ones they had loaned out. When this was discovered occasionally, when people would find out due to some economic calamity or some reason the community needed more money and they wanted to go get their gold and the goldsmith didn't have that much, a number of them were actually hung. It was against the law. It was a capital offense. It was fraud.
And so then the goldsmiths amassed great power. They internationalized so they could run from country to country. The family split up for safety. They developed their own intelligence networks that were the most sophisticated. They began to pay off local lords and royals for protection from the mob, and then the corruption began setting in, what would you say, by 1700 or so, to where now they can go 10 to 1, 20 to 1. But, I mean, I guess that digresses. Do you guys want to comment on that?
Well, no, you're basically correct. That's right, and the timing's about right. It reached a national scale where nations, or, typically it was aristocracy back in the 17th century, needed to borrow money for various wars. And so they would go to the goldsmiths, and the goldsmiths would give them, in essence, this fake money. They formed into corporations called banks, which is simply a word that comes from benches, where these transactions took place in Italy in earlier days. But essentially they were just corporate bodies or groups of these people, these goldsmiths, who grouped together and loaned the money to the governments. Well, the governments then paid interest on it, and so wealth became more and more concentrated, and you're right, they used this money to corrupt the political system.
And then pretty soon it didn't matter if they cheated you. Nobody got in trouble, and they would just send out the guard to attack the small middle classes when they got ripped off. Just absolutely amazing. Well, please continue. This is riveting information for people, and for those that don't know, that's who the New World Order is it's basically an amalgamation of European royalty with the goldsmiths who've all intermarried, and they now own the planet.
Yeah, by 1668, the Reichsbank in Sweden, which was privately owned, was loaning money that they created to the government of Sweden. But they didn't actually create the national currency. That happened when bankers in Amsterdam financed the Glorious Revolution, which was when William III and Mary invaded England, overthrew the Stuarts, and so forth. Payback was they were allowed to create the Bank of England, which was privately owned until World War II, when it was nationalized. And the Bank of England, which most Englishmen assumed was a government entity, was in fact privately owned. And the Bank of England created money out of nothing. It loaned it to the British government, which used it to expand the empire. The interest was paid through taxes. The taxes were put on the common man. And there you had the transfer of wealth from the common man to the bankers. And the growth of the empire, which required massive borrowing by the government, actually facilitated this transfer of wealth to the bankers. So you can see where imperialism becomes something that the bankers desire and actively promote. And wars as well, because it's part of it. They're very expensive. Government borrows the money for wars, and the bankers profit. That brings us up to after the Bank of England, we had essentially the same process take place in the United States. In the colonial days, the Bank of England was providing the money, the paper money, in the colonies. The colonists didn't like that, and they began to create their own money called colonial script. And Bill, do you want to talk about the script a bit? Or?
Well, yeah, and in fact, Benjamin Franklin was a big supporter of the United States creating its own money. When he was ambassador to England, he was talking to